My name is Rachel Corey. I'm 32 years old, and I've learned that silence can be louder than any scream. For 2 weeks, my boyfriend Jonathan treated me as if I didn't exist. No words, no glances, not even a sigh in my direction. At first, I thought it was one of his moods, the kind of sulky punishment he'd used before. But as the days stretched on, his silence grew so heavy it filled every corner of our apartment, smothering me like a thick fog. That was the last time, because instead of chasing after him, begging for attention, or apologizing for sins I hadn't committed, I gave him a silence he could never break, a permanent one. But to explain why it came to that, I need to start from the beginning. I met Jonathan when we were both in college. I was majoring in computer science happiest when buried in algorithms and lines of code. I liked order structure things that made sense when the world didn't. Jonathan was the opposite. He studied graphic design, messy, vibrant, and alive. He'd show up to class with charcoal stains on his fingers and wild ideas in his sketchbook. Where I was the quiet, steady type, he was the spark that lit up every room. We clicked instantly. He told me once that I grounded him, kept him from spinning out. I told him he brought color into my life, that without him, my world was just grayscale. Looking back, maybe it was too poetic, too naive, but at the time, it felt real. After graduation, I had the chance to take a lucrative job in another state, but Jonathan's freelance career was just starting, and he didn't want to uproot, so I turned it down. Instead, I stayed covered rent during his dry months, cooked dinners, after my 10-hour days, and even learned enough Photoshop to help with his projects on weekends. I wasn't perfect, but I showed up. I thought that was enough. It wasn't. Jonathan had a habit one I ignored for far too long. Whenever I did something he didn't like, he punished me with silence. At first it was small. If I forgot to text back quickly, he'd give me one-word answers all night. If I missed some subtle hint he dropped, he'd turn away in bed and sleep on the edge. I'd find myself apologizing just to thaw the ice, even when I didn't fully understand what I'd done wrong. And each time I gave in, something inside me shifted like a piece of myself quietly eroding. I remember one night vividly, our second year together. I'd been working late on a project with brutal deadlines. I came home exhausted, but excited to see him. I leaned down to kiss him hello, but he didn't even look up from his laptop. "Rough day?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. I sat beside him, hoping he'd warm up. He shifted further away. That night, he rolled to the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket tight when I reached out. The next morning, there was only one cup of coffee waiting on the counter, his. 3 days passed before he finally spoke. His words, "You forgot the dinner reservation. I shouldn't have to beg for attention, Rachel. This is what it feels like when you ignore me." I apologized profusely, desperately, even though I had been the one drowning in deadlines. I made the reservation anyway, and we moved on. But that planted a seed of doubt. Was I selfish, neglectful? So I started overcompensating, planning every detail of our dates, checking in constantly, walking on eggshells. Anything to avoid that wall of silence again. The pattern kept repeating, each episode stretching longer, cutting deeper. I told myself this was just Jonathan's way of coping, that he'd grow out of it, that love meant patience. But love should never feel like punishment. And though I didn't know it yet, his silence was only preparing me for the loudest heartbreak of my life. Because one day Jonathan's silence wasn't meant to punish me. It was meant to discard me. The thing about silence is that it doesn't start as a scream. It starts as a whisper, easy to dismiss, until one day it's deafening. Jonathan's silences began like passing storms. If I forgot to reply to a text, he'd go quiet over dinner, scrolling on his phone, smirking when I asked what was wrong. If I was 5 minutes late picking him up from his studio, he'd close himself off all evening, eyes fixed on the TV while I sat beside him in shame. And I let it happen. Each time I was the one apologizing, even when the mistake was trivial. I thought that's what you did in a relationship. You compromised, you made amends. But the truth was, I was being trained like a dog to anticipate his moods, to earn back his affection. One of the worst stretches happened about a year ago. It was a Friday night. I had a product launch at work, a bug that could have cost my whole team the weekend if it wasn't fixed. I stayed late, texted him updates. "Almost done, be home by 9. His reply, "K." That one word, flat, cold. By the time I got home, the lights were out. No dinner waiting, no hello kiss. Just Jonathan in bed, back-turned phone glowing in his hand. "Hey," I whispered, touching his shoulder. He shifted away like I was a stranger. The silence stretched. One night became 2, then 5. By day 7, I felt like a ghost in my own apartment. I'd try starting conversations. How was your day? And get monosyllables or nothing at all. When I reached for his hand, he pulled away like my touch burned him. By day 12, I was unraveling. Walking into that apartment felt like walking into a freezer. My stomach would knot before I opened the door, bracing myself for his indifference. I lay awake at night wondering what crime I had committed. Was it working too hard? Was I boring? Did he not love me anymore? I remember crying quietly into the pillow, begging myself not to make a sound because even my tears felt like an inconvenience to him. On the 14th day, the silence broke, but not how I hoped. I was in the kitchen making coffee, hands trembling from exhaustion when he finally spoke. Rachel, we need to talk. I nearly dropped the mug. My heart leapt not with joy, but relief. Finally. Finally, he'd explain we'd make up, maybe even laugh about how silly it had all been. Yes, I said quickly. Please. I've missed you so much, Jonathan. What's been going on? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. It wasn't relief I saw in his eyes. It was triumph. What's been going on is you, he said flatly. Working late, always prioritizing your job over me. I gave you the silent treatment to show you how it feels to be ignored, to be last on someone's list. But you didn't even notice enough to change. I stared at him stunned. Jonathan, I did notice. It hurt. Every single day. But that project was critical. I told you it could lead to a promotion, more stability for us. He laughed. A short, sharp bark. Us. There's no us if I'm always competing with your code. My chest tightened. So, what are you saying? I'm saying I'm done, he replied, smirk widening. I've met someone else. Sophia. She's in my co-working space. She actually listens. She makes time for me without needing a lesson on it. Last week, while you were buried in your laptop, we grabbed coffee. It turned into more. His words felt like knives stabbing one by one, but he spoke them casually, like listing groceries. You made me do this, Rachel, he added with a shrug. Your emotional unavailability pushed me away. Sophia excites me. She doesn't make me feel like a backup. My legs went weak. I clutched the counter just to stay upright. You've been cheating on me. He tilted his head smug. Call it what you want. I call it moving on. I thought I'd scream. I thought I'd cry, beg collapse on the floor. But something inside me snapped, not with violence, but with clarity. This wasn't love. This had never been love. This was control. I looked at him steadily, though my insides were shaking. If that's how you feel, Jonathan, I won't stop you. His smirk faltered. That's it. No fight. No. Please don't go. I'm respecting your decision, I said, my voice eerily calm. You want space. You've got it. He huffed, clearly unsatisfied, as though he'd wanted me to beg. Fine, I'll pack tomorrow. Don't wait up. And just like that, he retreated into the bedroom, slamming the door. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the cold coffee in my mug. The apartment was silent again, but this time it wasn't his weapon. It was mine, because for the first time in 4 years, I saw Jonathan clearly not as a lover, not as a victim of my supposed neglect, but as a manipulator who thrived on my submission. And I knew deep in my bones that I wouldn't give him that satisfaction ever again. I didn't wait for him to pack. The next morning, while Jonathan was out at his studio, I slipped through the apartment like a shadow. I pulled my suitcase from the closet and filled it only with essentials: laptop, a week's worth of clothes, toothbrush, my passport, and the framed photo of me and my grandmother. Everything else I left behind. On the counter, I placed a note. Short, brutal, final. Jonathan, you don't need to bother packing tomorrow. The apartment is yours. I won't be back. I set my key beside it, slid my suitcase quietly out the door, and never looked back. Driving away felt unreal. My hands clutched the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The streets blurred. I wasn't sure if I was fleeing from him or from the version of myself that had endured so much in silence. By the time I reached a cheap hotel 2 towns over, the adrenaline had worn off and the weight of it hit me. I collapsed on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling until tears finally came. For days, I barely moved. I replayed every memory, every silent punishment, every sacrifice I had made. Turning down that job offer, covering rent during his dry months, cooking, cleaning, apologizing and apologizing again until apologies became my second language. And for what? To be discarded with a smug grin and a shrug? The silence of that hotel room was different. It wasn't oppressive like Jonathan's. It was empty. And emptiness has its own kind of ache. By the end of the week, I forced myself to book a therapy session. Online, anonymous, just me in front of my laptop screen. The counselor listened quietly as I poured it all out, the cold shoulders, The weaponized silence, the endless guilt. My voice cracked when I admitted I don't even know who I am anymore. I've spent years tiptoeing around someone else's moods. Her reply was simple, but it cut through me like lightning. Rachel, that's not love. That's control. Emotional withholding is abuse. He conditioned you to chase his approval. You are not the problem. I froze, blinking back tears. Abuse. The word I had never dared to use. But once it was spoken aloud, something inside me shifted. I wasn't weak for breaking. I wasn't unlovable. I had been surviving a war I didn't sign up for. Slowly, I started to stitch myself back together. I found a short-term rental in a mid-sized city an hour away, close enough for my job commute, but far enough to disappear from our old circles. I changed my number, blocked him on social media, email, even our shared streaming account. Every tie severed. At first, I filled my days with distraction. I went to the gym not to get some revenge body, but to feel alive in my own skin again. I hiked alone on weekends, breathing in the crisp air, relearning the sound of my own footsteps without someone trailing behind me with criticism or silence. Work became a refuge. My boss noticed the change. Without Jonathan's moods hanging over me, I threw myself into projects, and for the first time in years, I felt creative again. I landed a promotion leading a small team. More pay, more independence. Every step forward felt shaky but real. At night, though, the ghost returned. I'd remember the way Jonathan used to pull the covers tighter when I reached for him. The sting of making only one cup of coffee, his, never mine. The sound of a slammed door echoing in my chest. And yet beneath the ache, a quiet strength grew. Because now those memories weren't traps. They were reminders of what I would never accept again. One Sunday, I sat on my tiny balcony, sipping tea, laptop open, and thought, this is peace. This is what he could never give me. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of foreshadowing flickered. Because I didn't know it yet, but while I was rebuilding, Jonathan was unraveling. And soon his silence would come crawling back to me, this time not as a punishment, but as a plea. Time has a strange way of healing. At first, every day without Jonathan felt like an open wound, raw, stinging, impossible to ignore. But weeks turned into months, and slowly the bleeding stopped. I began to recognize myself again. The woman who laughed at silly memes at her desk. The woman who could eat dinner alone without feeling like she was somehow failing at life. The woman who could sleep peacefully through the night without dreading which mood she would face in the morning. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I was simply walking. Work became more than survival. It became fulfillment. I thrived in my new leadership role, mentoring younger developers, solving problems with my team instead of in isolation. My boss praised me for being reliable, steady, level-headed under pressure. The words landed differently now. Before, I would have thought steady means boring, echoing Jonathan's complaints. But now steady meant strong. Steady meant free. And in that steadiness, I found space for something I had quietly locked away: companionship. I met Patrick at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was 31, a high school counselor with a quiet humor that sneaked up on you. He didn't try to fill silences with charm or flashy stories. Instead, he asked questions that showed he actually listened. We bonded over music, our mutual love of acoustic guitar, and the ridiculousness of pineapple on pizza. Our first argument was over toppings, and it ended with him grinning and saying, "Fine, half and half." That's what compromise looks like. It was such a small thing, but it shook me. Compromise. That word had never lived in my relationship with Jonathan. With him, every disagreement was a test. I had to pass a gauntlet of guilt until I surrendered. But with Patrick, one playful back and forth, one easy solution, and we were laughing again. Dating Patrick felt like learning a new language. He called when he said he would. He sent me photos of sunsets just because he thought I'd like them. When I had to work late, he dropped off takeout without complaint and texted, "Proud of you. Don't forget to eat." No cold shoulders, no weaponized silence, no invisible walls. It was disorienting at first. I kept waiting for the ice to come, for the punishment to arrive, but it never did. Instead, there was warmth. I found myself relaxing in ways I didn't know were possible. My laugh came quicker. My shoulders didn't ache with tension at the end of the day. For the first time, I felt what love should have always been: partnership, not punishment. And yet, even as I flourished with Patrick, a shadow lingered at the edge of my peace. I'd catch myself wondering, where is Jonathan now? Does he care that I'm gone? Does he regret anything? I tried to shake it off, reminding myself that the chapter was closed. But the human heart is messy, and ghosts don't vanish just because you wish them away. One night, Patrick and I were lying on the couch, his head in my lap, as we watched some ridiculous reality show. He dozed off halfway through, his breathing steady, his presence grounding. I stroked his hair and thought, this is what home feels like. And then uninvited, another thought slipped in. Jonathan never gave me this peace, only silence. That was when I realized something chilling. I hadn't heard from Jonathan since the day I left. No texts, no calls, no angry outbursts on social media, nothing. It was like he had vanished completely. But deep down, I knew Jonathan too well. Silence was his weapon, but it was also his cage. He wouldn't be able to stay quiet forever. Somewhere, his world was crumbling. And sooner or later, his voice, or worse, his silence, would come crawling back to find me. I wasn't looking for news about Jonathan. By then, my life with Patrick had taken on a rhythm. Morning runs, shared breakfast evenings filled with laughter instead of silence. I had no reason to think about Jonathan anymore, and yet sometimes karma doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply arrives unannounced. The first whisper came through a mutual friend, Lily, who messaged me one afternoon out of the blue. You'll never guess Jonathan and that Sophia girl already over. I blinked at the screen, unsure how to respond. Already. It had only been a few months since he'd thrown me aside for her. Lily continued. Apparently he pulled the same old stunt. She canceled plans once for work, and he gave her the silent treatment. She wasn't having it. Called him out, dumped him, blocked his number. Brutal. I stared at the words, a strange mixture of disbelief and recognition washing over me. Of course. The silence his favorite trick. But Sophia wasn't me. She didn't chase after him begging for warmth. She walked. Just like I had. The updates didn't stop there. At a friend's birthday dinner, someone mentioned how Jonathan had been struggling at his co-working space. He's got a reputation now, they said, lowering their voice like it was gossip too hot to handle. People say he's high-maintenance moody, flaked on a big project because he ignored client emails for days, lost a contract over it. I sipped my drink, eyes steady, pretending not to care. But inside, a flicker of something stirred, not quite joy, not quite pity, just a quiet acknowledgement. The same silence he once used as a weapon was now destroying him. Weeks turned into months, and the stories piled up. One guy he briefly dated after Sophia complained to a mutual acquaintance. Everything was fine until I had to stay late at work one night. He caught himself correcting. He went silent for days, then demanded I apologize. Red flag city. I was out. Others drifted away too. Friends who once tolerated his moods started keeping their distance. Too much drama, they muttered. Even his family wasn't immune. Word spread that his mom, Linda, was worried. Jonathan had been isolating, missing meals, spiraling. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I had a supportive partner, a stable career, a circle of friends who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Sometimes late at night, I'd lie awake beside Patrick thinking about it. The version of me that once curled into herself during Jonathan's punishments would have felt guilty hearing about his decline. She would have rushed back to save him, carrying the weight of his choices on her back. But the woman I had become, she felt nothing but clarity. And yet karma wasn't finished. Because one evening as I was cooking dinner with Patrick, humming in the background, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But some instinct made me answer. Hello. The line crackled, then a familiar voice. A voice I hadn't heard in over a year spoke low and shaky. Rachel, it's me. Jonathan. My hand tightened on the phone, my breath caught. For a moment the room around me blurred, as if his silence had found me again. But this time it wasn't punishment. It was desperation. The first call I ignored. The second too. But Jonathan was persistent. He began leaving voicemails, his voice unsteady words tumbling out in ways I'd never heard before. Rachel, I was wrong. Sophia was a mistake. You were the steady one, the safe one. Please, can we talk? Just coffee, just 5 minutes. I deleted it without listening to the end. A week later, a new number appeared on my screen. Text messages flooded in. Please, Rachel, I can't sleep. I can't eat. I see now how much I pushed you away. You were the best thing I had. I was stupid. I'm sorry. Don't punish me with silence. Not like this. The irony nearly made me laugh. Jonathan, the man who weaponized silence for years, now begging me to break mine. I blocked the number. That should have been the end. But desperation has a way of leaking through cracks. One night my phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't Jonathan's. Rachel, it's Linda. My chest tightened. Jonathan's mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the breakup. Her tone was gentle, almost pleading. Honey, I know it's not my place, but... Jonathan isn't himself. He's lost weight. He barely eats. He stays in bed all day. He regrets everything. He talks about you constantly. I closed my eyes, gripping the counter to steady myself. Linda continued her words, tumbling quickly as if afraid I'd hang up. I'm begging you for old time's sake. Reach out. Help him. You were good for him, Rachel. Please don't let him suffer like this. For a moment, I almost slipped. The old Rachel, the one conditioned to carry his burdens, wanted to soothe, to fix, to rescue. But then I remembered. The nights I cried into my pillow while he ignored me. The mornings I begged for scraps of affection. The way he smirked when he confessed he'd found someone better. That Rachel was gone. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, calm, resolute. Linda, I'm sorry he's struggling. But Jonathan made his choice. He doesn't get to undo years of damage because he's lonely now. I've moved on. There was silence on the line, ironic, almost poetic. Then Linda whispered, her voice breaking, Please, Rachel, he needs you. No, I said firmly. He needs to face himself. And I ended the call. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, Patrick's laughter faintly drifting in from the living room, and felt the power reversal settle in my bones. For years, Jonathan's silence had controlled me. Now mine was unshakable. What I didn't realize was that karma hadn't delivered its final blow yet. Because soon I would come face to face with Jonathan again. Not through a screen, not through his mother's pleading voice, but in person. And when I did, the chapter would close for good. It had been nearly a year and a half since I walked away from Jonathan when the universe staged our final meeting. It happened at a wedding. A close mutual friend, someone I cared about enough not to skip their big day, had invited us both. I knew the risk that he might be there, but I also knew I wasn't the same woman anymore. I wasn't afraid. I arrived with Patrick on my arm, both of us dressed in soft autumn tones, laughing about the traffic we'd endured. The venue was beautiful, a garden strung with fairy lights, music floating on the evening air. And then I saw him. Jonathan. He stood alone near the bar, thinner than I remembered, his suit hanging off his frame like it belonged to someone else. His eyes darted nervously through the crowd until they landed on me. For a heartbeat, it felt like time folded in on itself, like I was back in that apartment staring at his back as he refused to speak. But then Patrick squeezed my hand, grounding me in the present. Jonathan hesitated, then started toward me. Rachel, he said softly, his voice cracking. You look good, happy. I gave a polite nod. I am. His gaze flicked to Patrick, then back to me. Can we talk, just for a minute? Patrick, ever respectful, excused himself to grab drinks. I stayed my posture straight, my heartbeat steady. Jonathan's hands fidgeted as he spoke. I've been in therapy. I see now how toxic I was. The silence. It wasn't fair. I thought it made me strong, but it just pushed everyone away. I miss you, Rachel. Please give me another chance. His eyes were wet, his voice trembling. For the first time, I saw him without the smugness, without the mask. Just a man crumbling under the weight of his own choices. But pity is not love. I met his gaze calm and unwavering. Jonathan, there's nothing left between us. That chapter is closed. His face twisted desperation bleeding into anger. That's it. After 4 years, after everything, we don't even matter to you. I shook my head. You mattered. Once. But you taught me what silence can do. And now I've learned how to use it. Not to punish. To protect. You lost me, Jonathan. And you don't get me back. For a long moment, he just stood there, jaw clenched, eyes glistening. Then he whispered almost to himself, I ruined it all. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I simply turned and walked back to Patrick, who handed me a glass of wine with a smile that said, You okay? I nodded, slipping my hand into his, feeling the warmth of a love that didn't require pain to prove itself. Later that night, as the music swelled and Patrick pulled me onto the dance floor, I caught a glimpse of Jonathan leaving early shoulders hunched, swallowed by the dark. It was the last